into
I
it?
click on. None of them are working.
Not working.
Not working right now.
So what you gonna do now? You gonna have to reason out.
So I was trying to get mix on.
This lady in the purple.
Purple.
She need that.
She's one of those walk up and down people.
She's coming.
Hi. The ones. I'm sorry. The ones that we have right now aren't really working. So I'm trying to get you one, but in the event that it starts without it.
Try quick. Because my DG is speaking. He doesn't even know about the slides. It's just that we want to ensure that those slides reflect what he's saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I will try my best. No promises though, but I will try my very best to get you a click. Alright?
I'll be sitting right there. But we'd like to set it up before the actual session starts. Thank you. How can we load it on in the meantime?
But if not, we have this option here.
No, but him don't know. Him can't touch nothing and him don't know. I stand beside him. Sir, that's very unprofessional. That can't be done. Them not have a clicker.
So somebody has to stand here?
Yes, we were
And we're
thinking
not even
about
good
it.
that we can stand there with DG. Unless if DG stands, no,
Can you do a left and a
no,
right
he has to
click here?
stand.
He
Can
would
you
have
touch
to
it?
stand here, but it's going to be funny if he's reading
And no,
touch
and
it
trying
once,
to
No, but
get
him don't even know the slides.
sides. No,
So
it
that
can't.
can't work. We need a clicker.
Oh my.
You need a clicker.
Yeah.
This shows him on. Just trying to get it.
So you want to load this on in the internet?
I don't even know much about this system.
Yeah.
On each side. Look, put it over there or over there. Put it here. Put it here. Right next to the Vision one. Yeah. Or on the other side of the SDG one. I don't.
Would be a good idea if you did.
No, but I think it's bossy you and have everything.
Bossy you way.
You got it.
I'm still seeing if we have. So this is.
This is it?
Tony Shea. Just go date modified. Just click on date modified. Just click that. No, just click here. Yeah, so. Go down. Go down.
No, it does it now.
Could I ask you to take your seats, please? waiting for some participants, very distinguished participants, so please bear with me a couple of minutes more. Thank you. Okay. Distinguished ministers, dear guests, it's really great to now enter into the grand final of the meeting, the 3 days meeting that we have had. In this session, we'll try to look at the bigger picture of things, because we've gone through many, many areas, bigger and smaller ideas. At some point it is also important to try to bring it together. And it's my privilege, first of all, to give the floor to the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And Minister, let me say how much I've been impressed by your personal engagements before, during, and I'm trust also after this meeting. It's really great.
foreign ministers of the Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis, and other colleague ministers of government of the region, UN resident coordinators and UN resident representatives from the region, heads of international organizations, ambassadors, senior officials of participating countries, and senior officials of the government of Jamaica, young people, youth representatives, civil society representatives, other distinguished guests, members of the media, good morning. Over the last 2 days, we have continued on this journey towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. We've been seeking solutions as we build on the work done here in Jamaica and in the Bahamas in February of this year, as well as the work done in Trinidad in May of this year. This morning, I'm pleased to provide a brief overview of the work that has been done over the past 2 days. We are all aware of the challenges faced by our societies and that effective action is an imperative. Our engagement has reinforced the recognition that the implementation of the SDGs will require commitment at all levels and the participation of all sectors of society. We've acknowledged that this can be a daunting task, but in so doing, we've also concluded that the most effective way forward is to develop new partnerships and strengthen existing ones. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in this particular context, I really am happy to have observed that this conference was undertaken in a partnership framework. The inclusion of young people, civil society, private sector, and academia has meant that there has been greater depth to our discussions. And this has in turn increased the rigor, I think, of the solutions proposed. It's anticipated, therefore, that going forward we will be held to a higher standard of discourse on Caribbean development. And there will be an expectation that the policies and programs advanced for development are inclusive and evidence-driven. Through the various engagements on panels, the solutions and strategies workshops, the distinguished lecture, and the ministerial exchange, we've gained a keener understanding of the way forward. And in that regard, have moved that much closer to outlining a regional approach to attaining the SDGs. We've heard the call of civil society and youth for greater involvement in the decision-making process, a cry which is not new. We've also heard from these sectors, however, an emerging voice, a voice that says we don't need to wait for an invitation. And I love this voice because this is a voice of ownership and activism. Because not only does it say, we have our own table and you will hear us from this table, but it speaks to the dual levels of engagement, not only partnership, but ownership and activism. So dare I say that in that context, the region can look forward to a future where youth and civil society not only implement bold solutions within their spheres of influence, but also engage in active partnerships for sustainable development with government. If this conference, in fact, provides an opportunity for young people and civil society to coalesce around this rallying call, this call for ownership, activism, and partnership, then I believe that our meeting this week would have served to fulfill a higher purpose. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as Jamaica contemplated the previous work in the region on preparing our countries to make good on our stated desire to attain SDGs by 2030, we noted that there are two major planks on which the process must be built: adequate, secure, and consistent financing, and two, the capacity of our countries to implement necessary measures. It was on this understanding that we proposed a ministerial exchange as part of our consultative process. Allow me, therefore, to share a synopsis of the discussion in the exchange and some of the outcomes therefrom. The ministerial discussions were guided by two presentations. The first was an update on the work being done by the UN-centered Group of Friends for SDG Financing, led by Ambassador Courtney Rattray, co-chair of the group, and the second was on capacity building for SDGs implementation by Professor Sena. Membership of the group of friends, if I can share just a bit about it, includes UN permanent representatives, philanthropic organizations, the International Chamber of Commerce, think tanks and academia, as well as UN departments and agencies. It's co-chaired by the UN permanent representatives of Jamaica and Canada. The group has established a number of objectives, including that of informing the core of permanent representatives in New York of the complexities of development finance, developing a better understanding between our countries and international financiers, who too often view us as too much of a risky investment, and discovering, in turn, a deeper understanding of the structural impediments in the financial system, which inhibit large-scale flow of institutional capital towards attaining sustainable development goals. The group has to date engaged with JP Morgan Chase, BlackRock, La Caisse du Dépôt, one of the largest Canadian pension funds, and in the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. It has also engaged with several multilateral and national development banks, including the International Financial Corporation, the IDB, and the Asian Development Bank. So the importance and the potential that can come from engagement within and through this group of friends has been made clear. So regionally, it is now for us to seek out to deepen that partnership and to deepen the potential results therefrom. On the issue of capacity development, Professor Sena emphasized that the SDG implementation requires mechanisms for coordination and consultation between governments, business, and civil society. He noted that capacity building must be of a dual nature, comprising individual learning and institutional application or transfer of knowledge to the job. He further underscored the difference between training and education, the latter being an investment that requires a return on that investment and not just an individual benefit. So there's a different thinking that has to evolve around training and education and alignment, not only with job availability, but taking into consideration the other dimensions of sustainable development. So always keeping in mind the social, economic, and the environmental impacts when we look at those matters. The presentations provided for robust discussion from which emanated an acknowledgement of the point made by Professor Sena that implementation must take into account the need to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels to ensure that governments are responsive, inclusive, and participatory. And I was just speaking with one representative of a small civil society organization, NGO, what would we call you? Social enterprise, who is engaging in training teachers how to implement farms at schools in a sustainable way. So this is outside of whatever is being done by Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Education. And we're talking about, well, how do we bridge that gap? Is that gap bridgeable? How do you have small organizations that are doing great things in communities linked in with larger support and potential funding opportunities from institutions which exist within government for that specific purpose? So we're here in the same space, so that's one step. But how can we bridge those gaps in each country, between each government and these organizations? Because we have all organizations doing great things in different spaces. How do we coalesce? How do we bring all the actions together to get that movement and that momentum towards attainment of the goals? This conference has provided an opportunity for sharing between eclectic groups of panelists, presenters, participants, and musicians, reminding us that notwithstanding our challenges, we all have the potential to realize our growth and development objectives, and that inclusion is key. We've benefited from information emanating from the panels and workshops on resource mobilization strategies, increasing efficiencies by leveraging human and financial resources, and by knowledge sharing. We've also examined the continued relevance of traditional sources of financing in achieving national and regional development objectives while we seek new and creative alternatives. In addition, the quality of financing was cited as being critical to identifying the interventions that could be catalytic drivers of positive outcomes across multiple SDGs. During our thought-provoking exchanges with distinguished professors present, we were fully reminded of the importance of pursuing a diversified and sustainable economic model. In addition, we were encouraged to develop or expand into non-traditional sectors such as medical tourism, also called medical treatment, with a sports and culture dimension. And we've been encouraged to promote higher education services, noting in particular Professor Sachs' recommendation that we recognize education as items 1, 2, and 3 on the priority list. We were further encouraged to ensure that in implementation of the SDGs, we identify the most pressing needs and give them priority. Ladies and gentlemen, the deliberations and recommendations also emanating from this morning's session have further advanced our discussions on practical ways to minimize our implementation deficit. The proposed outcome document on our conference, the Partnership Framework on Promoting Cooperation and Coordination in the Caribbean, details our most urgent objective, that of closing the implementation gaps and effectively engaging all stakeholders in a whole-of-society approach to development. In this respect, we look forward to your endorsement of the Partnership Framework, which will be presented by Mr. Adrianos Melkert shortly, our conference advisor. I am confident, ladies and gentlemen, of a truly successful outcome to this conference and look forward to our continuing dialogue and our work, as a matter of fact. We need to stop saying dialogue and work in the months ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Once more, very, very stimulating remarks. And indeed, it's now not any longer dialogue, it's action and maybe also instruction, command and control. Inclusion. That's the right spirit, and that's the spirit of this conference. So thank you very much once more. It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Wayne Henry, Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, with this wonderful acronym that we heard yesterday. He will present the SDG achievement status in Jamaica. And you need the screens for that. No? So please, can the screens come down?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Adrianos Melkert, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Ministers of Government throughout the region, national delegations, international development partners, representatives from academia, youth representatives, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. And with all the diplomats here and foreign dignitaries, diplomacy is the name of the game. Huh? And so a young man came in a store, well, a lady came in a store and spoke to a young man asking for half a head of lettuce. And she said, young man, I'd like to buy half a head of lettuce. And he said, ma'am, we don't sell lettuce by half the head. If you want a small head of lettuce, we can accommodate you. She said, please, I want half a head of lettuce. Don't give me any talk. And he said, I'm just telling you the store policy, ma'am. And she said, let me speak to your manager. So the young man went to get the manager, didn't realize the lady was following him. He saw the manager, he said, sir, some idiot wants to buy half a head of lettuce. And when he saw the lady, he said, and this nice lady wants the other half. Well, let me say that I'm honored to be here representing the Government of Jamaica and the Planning Institute of Jamaica at this regional conference on the SDGs. Our collective collaboration and partnership will effectively accelerate our implementation of this transformative plan of action for the region. As many Caribbean countries are in the process of aligning their national development strategies with the 2030 agenda, this conference is a strategic moment for the region, to clearly articulate how we intend to proceed towards our collective future. For Jamaica, the implementation of the SDGs is a priority for us, as Vision 2030 Jamaica, national development, is hinged on the principle of inclusive growth and sustainable development, to leave no one behind. The presentation this morning is to highlight Jamaica's engagement in UNDP's mainstreaming, acceleration, and policy support MAPS process, the formulation of an SDGs implementation roadmap, and our ongoing efforts to deliver the SDGs in Jamaica. This journey began in May 2014. The Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ, in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, MFAFT, facilitated the establishment of a multi-ministerial working group to coordinate the national process. Vision 2030 Jamaica was utilized as a framework for agenda and priority setting for the local multi-agency consultations on the post-2015 development agenda. The result of this process was a national outcome document, which aligned Vision 2030 Jamaica, the National Development Plan, with the post-2015 development framework. The national outcome document was used as a framework for all national delegations to the meetings and negotiations for the post-2015 development agenda and the adoption of the 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. This approach facilitated an alignment of the agreed outcomes and targets of the post-2015 development agenda with key elements of Vision 2030 Jamaica, including the 4 goals and 15 national outcomes. In the alignment process, matters relating to gender, population dynamics, human rights, and culture were treated as cross-cutting themes. At a very early stage of the SDGs process, Jamaica recognized that the emerging agenda would require a solid framework of indicators and statistical data to monitor progress, inform policy, and ensure accountability of all stakeholders. This would therefore require the alignment of the agreed global indicator framework with national systems for monitoring and evaluation of the achievement of national development outcomes. This would also include strengthening national statistical capacity and integrating the global indicators in relevant sector-level indicator frameworks. And Jamaica, through the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, STATIN, is a member of the IAEG SDGs as one of the 2 representatives from the Caribbean region. As the process evolved further, the government of Jamaica, through the PIOJ, made a request to the UNDP country office to support the development of a roadmap for the effective implementation of the SDGs. A SDGs MAPS mission was deployed from October 24 to 28, 2016 to support the effort. The process recognized that while Jamaica had already made efforts to align the SDGs with Vision 2030 Jamaica and made traction in some areas of the maps, there were other areas which needed improvement and bolstering, namely raising public awareness, tailoring the SDGs to the subnational and local level, monitoring, reporting, and accounting, strengthening horizontal and vertical policy coherence, budgeting, and assessing the risk and adaptability. The proposed roadmap is a product of the collaboration between the national focal points, namely the PIOJ, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, STATIN, and the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, based on insights and information collected from a series of consultations and bilateral meetings. Consultations were convened with senior-level government officials and the SDGs core group. There were specific consultation sessions for social, economic, environmental, and data management stakeholders, as well as representatives from CSOs, private sector, academia, and the international development partner community. Additionally, the roadmap also draws from the recommendations of the Economic Growth Council, the EGC, and is now before Cabinet for their consideration. A rapid integrated assessment was conducted of all Jamaica's national planning documents. Results from the assessment confirm that Vision 2030 Jamaica, the medium-term socio-economic policy framework, the MTF, and sectoral policies and plans are strongly aligned with the SDGs. Jamaica's planning documents reflect either full or partial alignment with 91% of the 115 SDG targets deemed relevant for the country. In addition to highlighting the areas of alignment, the roadmap identified gaps. Of the 5 pillars of the SDGs, people, planet, peace, prosperity, and partnership, the main gaps are on the planet pillar, 72% alignment, and the partnership pillar, 50% alignment. I was to be clicking this all as well? Okay. The roadmap, it's a strategy to get you to focus first and then. The roadmap proposes a set of accelerators in each of the 4 national goals identified. You can stand this side, man. Come on, let's welcome Tony Shea Freckleton from the PIOJ. Put your hands together for Tony, who does not like the spotlight at all. Right? The roadmap proposes a set of accelerators in each of the 4 national goals identified in Vision 2030 Jamaica. These include interventions that could be implemented within existing programs to improve efficiency and maximize dividends across various development priorities. Goal 1, to progress towards the first national goal of empowering Jamaicans so that they can achieve their fullest potential. The roadmap suggests focusing on strengthening the outreach efforts of social protection programs, expanding care services for children and the elderly, pursuing multidisciplinary non-communicable disease (NCD) prevention efforts, and addressing the health and psychosocial consequences of violence within communities. Goal 2, to accelerate progress toward the second national goal of a secure and cohesive society. The roadmap focuses on strengthening the judiciary and police systems and stimulating education and community environments that help prevent violent behavior within the youth. Goal 3, to move towards a prosperous economy for all. Jamaica's third national goal, the roadmap suggests supporting MSMEs by establishing inclusive procurement processes, strengthening supply chains, and encouraging inclusive financing. Goal 4, to secure a healthy national environment. Some of the proposed ideas include strengthening the land use management system, building on disaster and climate risk management efforts, strengthening protected areas, enhancing public awareness, and improving waste management. A critical challenge in the implementation of the SDGs in Jamaica is the need to find innovative financing mechanisms for critical investments, as mentioned by our minister. The roadmap proposes some ideas to explore new sources of domestic, international, and private financing. Some of these include improving capacity for tax audits to address transfer pricing, exploring options for green fees, debt for nature swaps and diaspora bonds, facilitating social impact investment, and establishing a philanthropy platform. With respect to monitoring and reporting, Jamaica is very well positioned to monitor progress toward the SDGs, having completed a map of its data capacity in relation to the SDG indicators. The mapping exercise conducted by Statin concluded that out of 223 relevant indicators, Jamaica already produces 66, that's 29, almost 30%, and has data to produce some 69, almost 31% more. Some recommendations to overcome the identified gaps focus on prioritizing data in areas that are key to the country, harmonizing the national statistical system, and strengthening the capacity of data users, and partnering with private sector and civil society for the generation of new data. Another key recommendation from the mission was the establishment of a clear institutional apparatus to lead the coordination and to facilitate the implementation and monitoring of the SDGs. This has been demonstrated to be a key pillar to the success and localization of this global agenda at the national level. Jamaica's structure consists of a core group, an interministerial working group, thematic working groups under Vision 2030 Jamaica, and sector committees. Given the relevance of non-state actors in implementing Vision 2030 Jamaica, and by extension the 2030 Agenda, the roadmap proposes incorporating these groups into the existing structure in a way that ensures their ownership. And as Minister mentioned this morning, they were speaking with another group, a new group, encouraging and engaging teachers in the use of technology. Finally, the roadmap proposes a national outreach campaign to sensitize the public and to engage civil society organizations and the private sector to ensure that all voices are heard. What have we done? With support from the UNDP, Jamaica has embarked on several initiatives to address some of the recommendations from the MAPS mission. One, strengthen the national coordination mechanism for the SDGs. The SDGs core group, that's the PIOJ, Statin, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, remains in effect to drive the coordination mechanism for monitoring the SDGs. A proposal has been made to Cabinet to establish a national SDGs oversight committee comprising representatives from government, private sector, civil society, and academia. The intent is for this group to replace the interministerial working group, if approved. This committee will provide oversight for monitoring the implementation of the National Sustainable Development Agenda. 2, enhance awareness of the SDGs and their alignment with Vision 2030 Jamaica. Through the Vision 2030 Jamaica Secretariat, there has been constant engagement of key national stakeholders in SDGs discourse and mainstreaming activities. Work on the SDGs has been integrated in the Vision 2030 Jamaica thematic working groups. In order to facilitate the localization of the SDGs, the team has begun to engage local government representatives and municipal councils to align the SDGs with their local sustainable development plans. Through existing information, education and communication programs, the SDGs and Vision 2030 messaging has been aligned. Vision 2030 Jamaica, advancing the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. And that's fairly new. Again, Vision 2030 Jamaica, advancing the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. 3, enhance technical knowledge to produce high-quality data for monitoring the SDGs. Through Statin, a series of data quality workshops will be convened in October to December of this year. The primary purpose of this initiative is to promote the production of high-quality indicators for the monitoring of Jamaica's progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. As such, the focus of this initiative will be on improving the quality of data among ministries, departments, and agencies involved in the production of data for the SDGs. As I close, our Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, outlined Jamaica's commitment to the SDGs in his keynote address. I wish to use this platform to underscore Jamaica's commitment to ensuring that as a region, we advance together, ensuring that no country or citizen will be left behind. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Very much for this introduction and confirmation that in Jamaica tremendous work has already been done and that you're really on track for the years ahead. I think I should now give the floor to myself. But I'm waiting for the partnership framework latest version. I hope that somebody can provide that. But working on SDGs is also about improvisation. And what I wanted to do in this last part of the morning session is to make a few remarks as a privileged observer, because I feel really privileged that you have invited me into this process, even including the discussion on the partnership framework, to learn tremendously from what's going on here. It's not the first time that I'm in the region, but every time again you are learning many, many new things. And also to feel, say, comfort that when globally we're discussing about sustainable development goals, that this is not any longer a kind of diplomatic or technocratic concept, but that it is something real that is moving lots of people and that is bringing cross-sectoral so many people together. And the major thing of this conference was really the variety of participants that met, that spoke to each other very openly in a very engaged way. And what a difference that is compared to around 2005, 2006. I know that because at that time I came to the UNDP, and one of my tasks was to look at the Millennium Development Goals at the time, the 8 goals that were formulated in 2000. And one of my first questions was, who is keeping track? Give me the data. And then we can know what kind of action we have to undertake through all the country offices and with all the UN organizations throughout the world. And I'm not kidding. It wasn't there. It simply wasn't there. The World Bank did something at a very high level of aggregation in the Global Monitoring Report, but that was it. So we've started to think and to work on that, and we took the initiative to establish an MDG gap task force. So we introduced the word gap because it was clear that with all the lofty objectives ahead of us, the gaps were very wide in terms of data, let alone in terms of achievements. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon took that point and subscribed to it and established that task force for providing every year a gap, MDG gap report. Fast forward now to the extension first of the MDGs to the SDGs, which is not only from 8 to 17, but more importantly, most importantly, it's engaging the whole world. It's not any longer just asking the South, developing countries, you have to do your homework. No, homework is now here for everyone, in North and South. And that's a major breakthrough. That is true globalization, and not the kind of globalization that we need to be afraid of. This is the kind of globalization that we need. And this is what you all in this conference also have been contributing to. Because after all, globalization is made up of all the communities, locally, nationally, regionally, that contribute to make the globe a better place for all. The Prime Minister started to identify some SDGs that may be more urgent, more important than others in the context of the region, which is understandable because we cannot do everything at the same time. The perfect is often the enemy of the good, and we have to keep that in mind. He mentioned SDG 8 and 16. 16 on justice, 8 on work. And in the presentation this morning, the very good presentation this morning by the Solutions Network, and I like that word solutions also, showed, if I had a correct look, 5 SDGs in particular that are important for the region. 16, to start with, the justice. 9, the infrastructure and innovation. 3, the good health. 8, work. And 10, inequalities. And I think that's very important because that table shows probably also where it would be most efficient to concentrate cooperation in the region. Of course, you want to cooperate on everything, but cooperate first, in my view, on those things that you have most in common, because there the drive, the incentive, will come very naturally. I had a feeling Okay, we'll come back on that. Thanks. This was a very secret message, but you're going to get the gist of it later. So those 5 are really standing out, I think, just on the basis of the analysis presented this morning. But there was one perhaps missing, and I'm also not surprised about it, but it's so important that we are all aware of that. That is SDG 5, gender equality. Because there is no other SDG that is so cross-cutting, so defining for the achievement of all the other SDGs than SDG 5. But the problem we always have as policy makers, as politicians, as researchers, is that because it is so cross-cutting, you don't put it in a silo. You don't have you have, of course, specialists on gender, but they say always you have to look at everything. And this has to be addressed one way or the other. Just mentioning a few highlights that I think came forward in the opening session. I believe Minister Johnson-Smith was very much to the point to mention that there is a growing momentum. And we're part of that. These days are really a proof that this is happening as we speak. And also that strategic partnerships is the name of the game, is the name of the approach. And that, as you said this morning, this offers also greater depth, because we all have to share knowledge from where we are working, where we are experts, and nobody can master all expertise at the same time. So working together means also achieving greater depth. The UN presentations very much emphasized that no one behind means the furthest behind first, which is frankly the most difficult to do, because sometimes it's quite easy to achieve results, the so-called low-hanging fruit. But those are often the people that are closest to us. They're part of, so to speak, our communities. We know them. Say, middle-class environment. That's the easiest part often. But as you know very well in your societies, but in Europe or in America it's no different, there are many people at great distance from the centers of decision-making and the centers of research. And to pull them up and to put them into the spotlight, that is really the biggest challenge of all. Saying no poverty in 2030 is saying that you have to get out to the quarters where the people are living in poverty. Also, the UN has spoken about the indebtedness question, the debts that many of your countries are carrying. I'll come back on that. It's a very important point, and I was very happy to hear what the Minister said about that this morning. What I found really also refreshing is being here at the University of the West Indies, which has a great reputation globally, but to hear about these words, activism and collaborative outreach. And I liked particularly this word activism, Because you know, universities today, particularly in America and in Europe, they've become more market mechanisms, marketing tools. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. Yes, I demonstrated against all kind of things. And definitely not in a suit, I tell you. Universities need to be a source of inspiration, activism, beyond, outside the box, out of the box thinking. And this is what I sense, that there's space for that here at this university. So I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to sense that. And Jeff Sachs, I thought, made a very important point with his term climate justice. That's a great terminology. Because it's not only about climate, just looking at what's going on with the weather. Are we all right? Yes? Okay. But it's certainly also a matter of equality, equal opportunity, justice. And the ideas about insurance schemes, how to deal with prevention, that's really very important. And the other line of thinking that I think should guide us also in the years ahead is the notion of innovation, innovating an economy, which can happen everywhere, in bigger and in smaller countries. There are tons of opportunities to innovate, and innovation means, in essence, making yourself less dependent. And that, I believe, is for the Caribbean also something very important to keep in mind. Let me take one sidestep here, because being at the university, I can recommend some reading. One of the best books that I've read in the past years that is really speaking to the issues that we've been discussing here is a book called The Entrepreneurial State, Debunking Public versus Private Sector Myth. It's written by a professor in London called Mariana Mazzucato. And it's a great book because it shows that basically the private sector only finds the courage to invest after an entrepreneurial state has made the high-risk investments and has created the infrastructure for companies to do their thing. And for instance, it's a great thing to be aware that every technology that makes the iPhone was government funded first. And there are tons of examples of that. I'm not going to dwell on that. She together with Michael Jacobs, has recently issued a book called Rethinking Capitalism. And there again, a number of authors, including Stiglitz and others, they are addressing how economic policies can be more innovative, inclusive, and sustainable. And there are many elements that are important for you. And now you can say, oh, but wait a minute. This is, of course, written for the US. And it's about the US. It's not. It's also about countries like, and they were mentioned this week in some of the sessions, like Finland and Singapore. Smaller countries that really put all their efforts, all their skills, all their knowledge together to become really powerhouses, economic powerhouses. This can happen in Jamaica or in the cooperation between a number of the other islands in the OECS or otherwise. This can happen if you really learn from that and take the right approach. Let me identify finally, trying to look at the bigger picture of what we've been doing. Three areas that bring a lot together: financial resources, social capital, and public management. On financial resources, I was very pleased with what Minister Johnson Smith said about the group of friends in New York and the creative thinking that is going on there. That's very encouraging. There is a strong lobby needed, and such a lobby will take years and years before it will lead to results. But if you maintain that strength and the strength of ideas, you will get there. And I believe particularly the notion of insurance, both at a macro financial level, but also at a micro level, looking to livelihoods in the tourism sector, for instance, one of the topics of the sessions. There's a lot more possible than today is at hand. There's something to that which I think could strengthen your position. I know that you're working on it, but it's also politically sensitive, not only here, but everywhere in the world. It's about domestic resources, and about domestic public policy efficiency. Let me give one example that I came across in discussing these days. I was pleased to hear about decriminalization of marijuana, not because I come from Netherlands. We like it. But because it is so important to set free lots of resources that need to be directed to much more important issues. And there's also, for instance, opportunities to go to arbitration and dispute resolution instead of bringing everything to court and for years and years working in courts. And look what kind of capacity that would set free. So it's not always only adding capacity, but it's also changing your working methods and being more efficient. And there are many areas where examples could be mentioned. Just wanted to highlight one. On the finances, also in some presentations, reference was made to China or to the Asian Infrastructure Bank or the New Development Bank in Shanghai. I think that's understandable because I know very well that the World Bank or the European Investment Bank or others can sometimes be a pain in the neck to have projects with. But my recommendation would be really try to do this together. Remain also strategic in your interaction with big players like China or the banks, whether it's the World Bank or the banks in Beijing and Shanghai. But definitely, there is a new playing field for these kind of investments, and it's important to make use of that. And under finances, my final point is on the diaspora that has been mentioned quite a number of times. And I believe that there are also countries in the world that show how effective one can engage the diaspora in helping the countries of origin to make a jump in IT, infrastructure, education, health, because there's a lot of knowledge around, there's money around, and the diaspora bonds that were just presented also, I think are a very interesting idea. Social capital. Although we like to mention SDG 8, work and growth, as a key SDG, and who would not like to subscribe to that, it's my own experience as a former Minister of Employment that it is very hard to organize that, to bring all the forces together to really invest into employment, because some people say it's the market that should do it. Others say it's education that should do it, but they're not bringing the world of work and education and training really together. It is a hard sell, but extremely important to look at young people not in education, employment, or training, the so-called needs. It is part
of the UN multi-country sustainable development framework. It requires a lot of action. I'm not going to dwell upon much longer, just by saying that in my experience, you need 20, 30 things to do at the same time. There's no silver bullet to just create jobs. It's what I did when I was a minister. And we brought down unemployment by almost 5%. But only by organizing it. And that's coordinating authority that must be put in place. And I haven't heard enough of that, really, in the discussions this week. So my recommendation would be to look into more depth at that and to link it, of course, to the big challenge of education that certainly has been recognized throughout the discussions. Social capital, I have to come back on that, is of course also women. Women are, as you know, just on the basis of the graduation from university and other training institutes, on average, smarter than men. They are probably also genetically smarter than men, with one caveat, that men have been very smart throughout centuries to suggest that they are the smartest. But I don't think I need to, for this audience, I need to say much more than that. Really looking more focused in every area of the SDGs, how the gender dimension could be supported, integrated, is extremely vital. Young people, one of the great things of this conference was the Youth Forum. And I think they came forward also with some very understandable claims to be recognized more, to have somewhat better status in being heard, and in having access to information and data. There's always a kind of tension because civil society, of course, should not become part of the government. Then something gets lost. But there are mechanisms, there are experiences also how you can work with them, and frankly the conference here was a very good example of that. There's one group I wanted to mention. It was discussed in one panel, and there's one paper on it, one or two papers. A very good paper was written by, I think, Floyd Morris on disabled. I liked that paper a lot. It was very specific recommendations. I understand that this is not immediately coming to the forefront when you're discussing about such a broad agenda, but we tend often to keep it a little bit aside. We have, of course, sympathy for it, but is not really in the focus of our attention. And you know, when I moved from Europe to America some 15 years ago, and as a minister, I was also in charge of legislation for the rights, promoting the rights of disabled. But that was a hard sell, really, always. And I came in America, and we have heard something about the government of America these days. I'm not going to enter into that. But one of the good things of America is that there's really strong legislation about creating conditions for access for disabled people at all kinds of levels. Look into that and try to get inspired by that. And that's also part of the SDGs. And then the third area, public management. A very obvious way of, or area of working together are the intended nationally determined contributions, these INDC papers that need to be written for the climate change action. I'm sure you're doing that already, but this is the most obvious to work together on. We have heard this morning about the capacity mapping for the monitoring of indicators, and it's really a great inspiration that the Solutions Network is working on this, and that this is happening also from this university. I liked very much Professor Saner's reference to an PPP observatory, public-private partnership, and also that he presented the 9 modalities of public-private partnership, because often we think there's only one modality. No, there are 9 modalities, but you have to study them, you have to understand them, you have to learn from experiences elsewhere. And I believe for the region it could be a very good initiative to put something like that in place. And there was also a more general suggestion, I think coming from one of the university professors here, to have, she called it a brokerage facility, to broker between the research that's being done at the academic level and how to translate that to policymakers and civil society and local communities as to what you can do with it. And it would be great if UE would have something in place there that people could really get more access. And talking about access, the biggest challenge to governments today is how they deal with data vis-à-vis their citizens. And this is a fortiori a challenge when it comes to the SDGs. And let me be very candid to governments. I know it's sometimes kind of embarrassing or annoying to put out data that perhaps are not very well fitting into your own intentions and rhetorics. And I'm talking here about as a former politician, so I know how you can get embarrassed by the data that you have to present. But it has to be done. Open data is really the key for true civil engagement around the SDGs. If you allow me to say, I happen to chair the board of a very interesting organization in Washington, D.C. called Development Gateway. And they are advising, and they have a lot of tools also, on digital data for development. And much of what I heard this morning and throughout the conference, I thought, go and look at their website and maybe take contact. Just for disclosure, I'm not earning money here, I'm a volunteer as a board member. I'm a volunteer. But I like what they do, and I see a lot of potential connection with what you're doing here. And finally, I thought it was coming from Guyana that you have put in place an accountability matrix. And that is a very important notion, that we should not only talk about the data, but also about who is responsible for what and when, and how to channel it through to whom. That's accountability. So data management cannot be done without that. And that was yet another example of the many great things that have been mentioned during the discussions here. All in all, this has been a big step forward. We will prepare a final report. Bear with me, it won't be possible to have each and every idea mentioned there. So we will try to cluster and to make it, say, digestible and workable for you. But I very much hope, and I actually expect, that the material in that report can be a source of inspiration for further work to come in the months and years ahead. Now I have to come to disclose the secret, which was whispered in my ear. That was about the partnership framework. Is it on? Yes. Because they were still ironing out the last dots and commas. And they is the government of Jamaica the very able staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who worked really through the night to get this done. And you know, it's really something very special that a conference like this, with that variety of participation that I mentioned before, was accompanied in parallel by a process to agree on a partnership framework at the ministerial level. Because this means that actually all the work that you've been doing these days immediately gets a status, a recognition at a political level that normally you can only dream of. And it shows the commitment of the governments, and I really would like to commend them for that they want to work with civil society in order to advance the SDGs. So I'm not going to read it out. I think it's just important to highlight, first of all, that all the countries present in this conference are now endorsing this partnership framework. And that is something of great value. In point 2, that they are subscribing to the call for universal action. And of course we can say, well, is this something new? No, it's not new. Is it important that it's being subscribed to? Yes, it definitely is, because this is an incentive and also a legitimation for everyone in each of the countries to basically also hold their governments accountable. And governments presented here are not shy of opening up themselves for that. Then in point 3, very important to note that this was of course not the first meeting. I'm actually quite impressed by the number of meetings that have taken place very soon after 2015. Again, in comparison with the MDGs, it took years before this started to work. Here you have immediately taken a lot of initiatives in different places, from Mexico to Kingston, in Nassau and other places. This is of course very important, that we are not all the time reinventing the wheel, but building and building on accumulated knowledge and agreements. The reference to the cooperation with the UE and the UN is of course key also to recognize this conference aiming at support for the key objectives: an inclusive, equitable and prosperous Caribbean, a healthy Caribbean, a safe, cohesive and just Caribbean, and a sustainable and resilient Caribbean. And those terms are important because they in fact represent also this cross-cutting nature of the SDGs. Then reference is made to the ongoing work on resource mobilization, knowledge, pooling, the mainstream acceleration and policy support that is provided, and the MSDF, I think, yeah, MSDF framework of the with the UN, but it's between the governments and the UN, and it's of course the governments in the lead and the UN trying to offer as much support and service as possible. Point 6, there is here and there some discussion on that. How precisely should we work on that? Should we read it? But in the end, there was clear consensus about the indispensable role of the private sector. It's not that everything is free, and that's why I referred also to this publication where the state is leading, also vis-à-vis the private sector, but you need the private sector for job creation, for innovation, for prosperity, for your business model, so to speak, in their language. Point 7, the data. And important to note that, of course, we are not alone, and the Solutions Network was also rightly referring to that. It is part of a unique, it's really unique, it never happened before. It's part of a global effort to work towards a global action plan for sustainable development data. And point 8, there's the dialogue, but also the sentence that we seek now further cooperation and coordination, because after all this is about Action 2030. And please do keep in mind that the original title of the conference was much more boring. Now it is Caribbean Action 2030, and rightly so. Point 9, the lives and the livelihoods of the citizens. Let's never forget that even as many of us are policy makers or one way or the other related to policy making, we sometimes tend to forget the faces of the people, the realities in which they're living. And that's what we need. I had to think about, somebody showed me yesterday these images of St. Kitts and the floodings there. And oh my, when you think about the people in their houses and their earnings that are suddenly gone. And where's the insurance scheme for that? You know much better than I what you're talking about, but this is what we always have to keep in mind, and is therefore part of the partnership framework. The national and regional multi-stakeholder partnerships in 10, the youth in 11, very important that they are also recognized in this statement. Financial sustainability, all the issues that have been discussed and referred to and that now have to be brought to a next level. The need to increase those financial resources, including through diaspora engagement and international private sector institutions. And the UN should, of course, further look at it. The international financial institutions should play a role, but let's also be realistic. It's a very tight budget these days in many areas, so we have to be creative and to fight for our rights, basically. And you hear, I'm saying now our rights, I'm getting Caribbean by the minute. Then in point 15, reference is made to the final report of this meeting. So instead of trying to highlight now what was the most important or the most pertinent in this meeting, we will try to capture that in the final report, which then, by and through this framework, will also have the status for further work and action that it deserves. Importantly, those countries are commended that have presented voluntary reports to the high-level political forum and at the UN, and other countries are encouraged to do so as well. And very importantly, we should really thank the government of Jamaica for the hospitality provided during this conference, and we look forward to continued stakeholder collaboration as we, you, all of us, seek to make regional SDG implementation a reality. Thank you very much. As a timekeeper, I apologize that we are 2 minutes late. Yes, there is a message that there will be another photo opportunity with the SDG poster boards for the head table, the minister, the heads of delegations, ministers and delegates. In the center of the room. Which room? Here? Here. Okay, so please stay for that photo opportunity. You want to say something? Yes, go ahead, please.
My name is O'Neill Grant. I'm the president of the Jamaica Civil Service Association and the vice president of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions. And I looked at the partnership framework that was displayed, and I listened to Dr. Henry's presentation. And throughout that, I saw no mention at all of the trade union movement as a stakeholder and a part of the UN system. And I think it's a grave oversight. I see civil society mentioned, I see the private sector mentioned, but I saw no mention at all of the trade union or the labor movement. I think it's something that betrays the UN system and should be corrected in our work going forward. Even in the conference document for the evaluation of the conference, there is no specific grouping for the trade union movement at this conference, something that we should really look at. Thank you.
I see the minister nodding, and I think that's a very fair point that you make. Of course, trade unions are also part of civil society, but it's also true. No, listen to, this was a semicolon. I've worked with trade unions all my life, don't worry. But they have their own status, also in the international system. They have their own role, and particularly in the SDGs, and I'm the SDG 8 guy, they're indispensable, as the private sector is. So maybe with your consent and with the consent of the government ministers, we could add that also to the partnership framework text. All right? Okay. Any other observation or cri de coeur? Please.
Good afternoon. I want to thank all the presenters. I thought this was a really very thoughtful session, and I quite liked all the presentations, and particularly the commitment of the Jamaican government by the minister, the work that the Planning Institute is doing and sort of leading the way in terms of the Caribbean. And I want to, Mr. Melkert, I almost wanted to hug you when you mentioned the importance of open data. I want to say that the SDGs, this opportunity, is perhaps the opportunity to rebuild trust and hope in the Caribbean and Caribbean future, certainly for Caribbean people. But we can't do that without a data-driven culture. And I think the failure of governments, I'm not blaming anyone, the failure of governments in the Caribbean, that failure has led to the, I would say, the skepticism and distrust by a lot of Caribbean people of the importance of information, because information for too long hasn't necessarily been used to the good or to the improvement of lives. A lot of people feel hopeless in the Caribbean, and I feel that this moment must not be missed. This really has to be brought across, taken across the Caribbean, into the bowels of every island, so that people regain that trust. And to do so, data, we can't only just strengthen the capacity of statistical institutions across the region, but data really have to be disseminated, made easily available. Academic institutions, wherever they exist, must be able to use the data and to churn out all kinds of papers, etc. So when you talked about open data, I felt very moved to come to say that I almost wanted to hug you. There are statistical acts in the Caribbean which still prevent data from being readily available. So legislation, these statistical acts have to be looked at as well. That culture of sharing of data, data collection, that whole data culture is very important. And transparency will be brought back. I want to say, you know, corruption, the decline in corruption will also lead people, and the increase in accountability will cause citizens to want to share their data. But currently, across the Caribbean, people are losing hope in the ability of giving information to make real change in their everyday lives. So we really have to work on that. And I want to implore governments to ensure that your actions are less corrupt, that they are fair, they are transparent, and there is a lot of accountability. This is how we're going to get the Caribbean advanced.
Thank you. Madam Minister.
Well, you didn't share your name, but I would like to hug you because I endorse and believe in everything that you have said. So I'm happy to say that Jamaica was the first country in the region to have an open data policy. We have an open data policy now. And we have, I know it's more than 100 government sites and pages that offer free, that are open now. You don't need a data service to access them, and we're seeking to grow those. I think the aim was 250 or something like that this year. So the matter of data, and as you would have seen from Dr. Henry's presentation, is very important. It's important for evidence-based policy making. It's important for building trust and transparency, as you have said. And while there must always be some segmentation and some protection by government of sensitive information, there is a vast amount of data that can help in growth, in entrepreneurial activity, in just a general sense of inclusion in societal participation that can be exposed. So there is a draft CARICOM policy on data and on statistics, sorry, it's not data, the language isn't there yet, but, but in statistics and in enhancing cooperation in statistics. And that, an update on that strategy is actually being put before heads next week. So there is a process underway. I think the point about the cost of data is an important one as well, because certainly there are agencies which use data as their own means of funding when that is sort of anathema to citizens' desire and need for the data. So that is something that has to be worked out across the board. There's some that's available, some not. There's some need for alignment in that. But I just wanted to say that what you said resounded so well. It is something that governments are looking at. Certainly I can speak for ours as well, and if there are members present who want to speak to what their governments are doing to help share in that sense, perhaps if not now, in our later session, it is something that is key. Because of course the most important means of ending corruption is to shine a light on it. Openness to information, so absolutely.
Thank you for those words. This must be the last contribution before the break. Yes,
thank
please.
you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on the presentation of the panel. I want to join Heather in the Hug Fest afterwards, because I really appreciate the effort that the perspective that has emerged from this conference in the declaration. And I want to make two suggestions benefiting from the opening that has been made by my friend, to suggest that in number 9, I think reference in one of the paragraphs, I think it's 9, reference is made to welfare of citizens. But if we could say men, women, boys and girls, it would mean that we are beginning to see persons in that frame. And secondly, where reference is made to the energy of youth, could we also add the energy of women as well, please, as the segment that is also excluded, reflecting your proposals, Mr. Chairman.
Minister, please.
Lynette, I noticed you did not include me in the Love Fest, in the Hug Fest. Anyway, no, but certainly, you know, including breaking down citizens to men, women, boys, and girls, I entirely agree with that, and certainly we'll ask the team to make that change. But I'm not 100% convinced in respect of energy of youth, because youth is young boys and young girls, young men and young women, and it's energy. Yes, but you don't want the energy of everyone? Yes. I'm the last person you have to speak to about it. So what I will do, what I'll commit to you is not necessarily in respect of that particular change, but that we will read the document again with agendaed eye and see if we have not sufficiently emphasized the role of women. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion. So thank you for this input. Okay, so we will have to conclude this session with this. I don't know whether there is it clear what now the next sessions are for everybody? Yes. Can you say something?
There are 2 parallel launches. One is by invitation only. That's the UN Regional Coordination Meeting on the Sustainable Development Framework, and you know who you are. And the other is for everybody, and that's going to be chaired by the Honorable Minister of Guyana, and Dr. Jala will make a presentation on implementation of the SDGs agenda. It's in the program, so we can look in the program.
Yes. Right, everybody needs to do the homework. All right, thank you very much. Don't forget, ministers, heads of delegations, the photo opportunity here, and the panel is available for hugs. Thank you very much.
But that's in the afternoon session.